ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه ثم أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Indeed, all praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, we beseech Him, we seek His forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from the evilness of our own souls and the evilness of our actions. Whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided, there's no one to mislead. Whomever He has led astray, there's no guide for them. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah is one and doesn't have any partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His servant and His messenger. As for what follows, for indeed the most truthful of all speech is the book of Allah, and the finest guidance is the guidance of Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the evilest of affairs with Allah are novelties in religion. Every novelty in religion will lead to misguidance, and every misguidance will lead to innovation, and every innovation will lead to misguidance, and all misguidance will lead to the hellfire. Inshallah ta'ala, we're starting our class on the book Wajibul Abd Idha Amarahu Allahu bi Amr بمعنى واجب العبد نحو أوامر الله ورسوله. So our subject matter today is from the book, The Obligation of the Servant, and that's all of us, male and female of us. The obligation of the servant towards the commandments of Allah and His Messenger. And we mentioned that there were 7 things that the Muslim must know or put in front of himself for whatever commandment or prohibition that he comes across in the book of Allah and the sunnah of His messenger. So this is an important matter. Now, one of the things that we mentioned before, we talked about the one that is knowledge. We talked about, we was on the subject matter of knowledge, the importance of having knowledge of the faith. But from there, I wanted to talk about this word ibadah. What does the word ibadah mean? We have mentioned this before. Can anyone answer that question? What does worship? What is ibadah? What is worship? Anybody know what worship is in the Arabic language?
To surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
He said again?
To submit it, to surrender to Allah.
To surrender and submit to Allah. That's true. That's part of its meaning. The linguistic meaning of the word, what's the linguistic meaning of the word ibadah? No, that's the religious meaning. I want the linguistic meaning. That's the religious meaning of ibadah. We want the Arab, what it means in the Arabic language, the word ibadah. I gave that,
Worship?
Yeah, I mean, that's the translation. But what's the Arabic word, what does the word ibadah actually mean? I had told you, I don't think you wrote that down. Ibadah, this is important for y'all to know. Ibadah, its original meaning means dhulla. Humbleness, to humiliate, to subjugate yourself. That's what the word ibadah means. It comes from the word abad. It means to subjugate, to be dhalil, to be subjugated.
Does it mean surrender to?
It's connected to it, which is disconnected to the word dhul, which I'm going to show. The Arabic language, we say about a path road that has been made. Tariqun mu'abbad, a path that has been subjugated, that has been made to walk on. Meaning, watta'athu aqdam, a path that feet walks on it. And so the feet that walks on that path made that pathway. As an example, I said that if an individual, we was in an open field, like across the street from the masjid, where everyone parked their cars, right? Let's say that was a grassy field, right? And every day, people walk across that field. It's just grass. Then one day, people decide we tired of walking around the field. So we walk across the field. We just start walking. What will happen to the grass where everybody step their feet at every day? What will happen to the grass there? Without trying to cut it or anything, just stepping on it every day.
It's going to be die and it's going to make a line on it.
Or make a road. Right? It's going to make a road. What happened? Our feet made a pathway to the point the dirt and the land right there became subjugated, submitted to what you want it to become, a path, right? The word ibadah means that. Something that subjugates itself, something that submits itself, surrenders itself to the orders of something else. It's subjugated. What subjugated that road was our feet walking on it, right? Just like a rug, if everybody walk on this rug, it's going to get a pathway from our feet constantly walking back and forth, right? So we have to understand the word ibadah comes from this, dhul, to humble yourself, okay? That's why when Allah Ta'ala, that's why the word worship is to comply, to subjugate yourself, to make yourself surrender to the commands of Allah and the prohibitions of Allah and His Messenger. You understand? So for example, this is the reason, and so that ibadah also must be mixed with mahabbah, with love. Listen to this poem of Ibn al-Qayyim about this. But this is part of the meaning of the ayah. What's the verse about why Allah created? How the verse go? Can anybody recite the verse of that proves the reason why Allah created us? Well, anybody can translate it?
We created man and jinn for ibadah.
We created mankind and jinn for ibadah, right? Yes. Ibn Abbas, in the tafsir of this verse, when it says, we did not create ma khalaqtul jinna wal ins. We did not create jinn kind nor mankind. Illa, except liya'budu, except to worship Him, right? He says, meaning li'amurahu wa anhahu, in order that I may command Him and prohibit Him. This is what Ibn Abbas said. Because how else can you make you become a subjugated before Allah? Humbled before Allah is by doing what He commands you and staying away from what He prohibits you, right? So that's an important subject matter. So for this reason, to be able to do that, you humble yourself out of love. Listen to the statement of Ibn al-Qayyim, clarifying this reality. Because our religion, all of it, is included in worship. Everything we do is for worship. Everything is for worship. And worship its original meaning is dhul, to humble yourself, right? Like we said, a path that has been covered. So worshiping of Allah must be a combination of the highest level of dhul, of humbleness, humiliation in front of Allah. You feel humble before Allah. You must feel in your chest a high level of embarrassment before Allah. Feel like you are controlled and owned and possessed by Allah. While at the same time you feel in your heart the highest level of love for Him, more than loving yourself or anything else. This is worship. To the point, your worship, your servitude to Allah will not be successful except with these two things. It's like a wheel, right? What makes the wheel turn on a car, or on a carriage, or on a bike? What makes that tire turn? What?
Yeah, the driver.
Well, not the driver.
The engine.
Not the engine. The pivot. The pivot. The pivot is the thing that makes the wheel be able. If that pivot breaks, it's called the pivot, right? It's this pivot, and that makes sure it allows your wheel to turn. The axle of the pivot. It's an axle and it's a pivot there that causes it to turn. Your worship, if it don't have these two things, dhul and mahabbah, complete humiliation before Allah and complete love for Allah, your worship will not turn. It won't be successful. Ibn al-Qayyim illustrated this. He said in his book called Nooniyya, he wrote a book with all of the words end with noon in his poem. All of the words, it's a poem on worship and minhaj, methodology. And the poem ends with a noon. Every word ends with a noon at the end of the poem. He talked about this subject matter. He said, وَعِبَادَةُ الرَّحْمَنِ غَايَةَ حُبِّهِ مَعَ ذُلِّ عَابِدِهِ هُمَا قُطْبَانِ. They go to noon. هُمَا قُطْبَانِ. It rhymes, it's a poem. He says, worship of Ar-Rahman. Worshipping Ar-Rahman. Who's Ar-Rahman? Allah. Worshipping Allah, the most merciful, is having the highest level of love for him, along with the servant humbling himself and subjugating himself to him in worship. These two are the qutbani, or the axle, the pivot in which his worship, for his worship. And he goes on, وَعَلَيْهِمَا فَلَقُ الْعِبَادَةِ دَائِرٌ مَا دَارَ حَتَّى قَامَتِ الْقُطْبَانِ. And Ibn Qayyim went on to say, and upon these two axles, these two pivots, right, the orbit of his worship encircles. Orbit means the space, like we're in the orbit.
In Spain, right?
Yes, within a space. So his worship orbits, that the space of his worship, or the orbit of his worship, encircles around these two. Highest level of humility before Allah, highest level of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you don't have these two, your worship will never be right. It'll never be right. Never. And then Qayyim says, as long as it encircles, and it will not encircle your worship, it will not turn until these two axles are right. It will get stuck. If that happened to your car tire, your wheel won't turn even if you try to drive. You put it on drive and you push the gas pedal to the bottom, it won't go nowhere. Because those pivot, or the axle, is not fixed. These two things is the axle of your worship. Ibn Qayyim went on to say, وَمَدَارُهُ بِالْأَمْرِ أَمْرِ رَسُولِهِ لَا بِالْهَوَى وَالنَّفْسِ وَالشَّيْطَانِ. Ibn Qayyim says, and the thing that he uses to circle with is based off the commandment of his messenger, based off the commandment of the messenger, meaning Allah and his messenger. Because the messenger didn't give us a commandment, except it was from Allah, right? Not based on the whims, nor the desires, nor shaitan. This is worship. So, Ibn Qayyim began with this to clarify that our worship cannot be successful with Allah without these two pivots. This is why when we gave the beautiful example before of the story of the man who was guarding for the Prophet, and the man kept throwing an arrow in his leg. You remember that story? Mm-hmm. And he was praying when this happened. The man threw one arrow, he still continued to pray. He threw a second arrow, went in his leg, he still continued to pray. When he threw the third one, he stopped praying to wake up his companion, because he was about to go unconscious. And when his companion killed the guy, he asked him, why did you wait so long? Why didn't you come get me when the first arrow went in your leg? He said, I was reciting a surah that I love, and I wanted to complete it first. This is because they reached, their worship was based off of complete love and complete humbleness and humiliation before Allah. And that humbleness and humiliation before Allah is you feeling defeated in front of Him. You feel your imperfections in front of Allah. You realize His perfectness. You feel your dire need for Allah in your life, that you can't live without Him, while realizing He has no need for you whatsoever. This is dhulm. This is humiliation. High level of that before Allah, while having high level of love for Him, loving, serving Him, worshiping Him, Him watching you serve Him greater than you love yourself and everything around you. This is what the companions became like. So our worship won't be successful until we do these very things, these two things. That's why the author, Muhammad Abdul Wahab, titled the book, The Obligation of the Abd, of the servant. He referring to the servant who has these two qualities. What is his? So he wants to know, that slave, he's diligent, he's zealous to learn what is his obligation towards Allah, which is these 7 things. So, while at the same time, since Allah Ta'ala is the greatest thing before Allah, the most tremendous thing before Allah, before everything else, then he realizes no one has the right to have mahabbat